The courtroom was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, but the kind that makes your heart thump louder than it should. My son sat just a few feet away from me, his little legs swinging off the edge of the wooden bench. He was only 8, but his face was older that day, like he'd aged in the minutes we'd been sitting there. Damien, my ex-husband, stood tall beside his lawyer. He wore that same smirk he always did when he thought he was winning. He looked straight ahead. Not at me. Not at our son. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipped through a few papers, and finally looked up. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you're asking for a change in custody. You've told this court your son has expressed a desire to live with you. Is that correct?" Damon nodded confidently. "Yes, Your Honor. Zayden told me he's not comfortable in his current living situation. He said he wants to live with me full-time." My stomach turned. I looked at Zayden. His hands were folded tightly in his lap. He didn't look scared, but he didn't look okay either. I wanted to reach for him to shield him somehow, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, and I think a part of him was too. The judge turned his eyes toward Zayden. "Son," he said gently. "Is that true? Do you want to live with your father?" Everything inside me stopped. My heart, my breath, my hope. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair to ask an 8-year-old that question in a room full of strangers and pressure and his father staring down at him like a shadow, but I said nothing. I waited. Zayden stood up. He didn't answer right away. He reached into the pocket of his tiny gray jacket, pulled something out, and held it up for the judge to see. It was my old phone. I'd given it to him to play games on a few months ago when I upgraded. I didn't even think it worked that well anymore. Zayden looked straight at the judge. His voice was quiet but clear. "May I play the recording from last night?" Every single person in the courtroom froze. Even Damien turned to look at him. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Recording?" Zayn nodded. "Yes, sir. From my dad last night." The bailiff stepped forward and the judge motioned for Zayden to hand the phone over. But before he did, Zayn added, "I didn't know what to do. I just recorded it, so someone would believe me." And in that moment, I knew something had happened, something I hadn't seen, hadn't heard, hadn't been able to protect him from. And my son, my 8-year-old boy, had figured out how to protect himself. I felt every eye in that courtroom shift to him, but Zayden didn't flinch. He stood there, shoulders back, his small fingers gripping the phone tightly. Damon's smirk faded. The judge hadn't pressed play yet. He looked at Damien, then at me, then back to Zayden. "You're sure you want to share this with the court?" he asked. Zayden nodded. My throat was dry, my fists clenched in my lap. Whatever was on that phone, whatever Damien had said to him, my son was brave enough to bring it here in front of strangers, in front of his father. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw something that broke me wide open. He wasn't just scared. He was standing up for himself, for me, for the truth. The judge finally pressed play, and nothing was ever the same again. People always ask me why I stayed with Damien for as long as I did. I don't have a simple answer. Love isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it's a knot you get tangled in so slowly, you don't even feel it tightening until you can't breathe. We met when I was 22. He was confident, funny, the kind of man who filled a room. He made me feel seen in a way no one else had. I didn't realize back then that some people only see you so they can find the right place to break you. The control started small. He didn't like some of my friends. Said they were bad influences. He wanted me to stay home more. Said real women prioritize family. When I got pregnant with Zayden, things got worse. I stopped working. He said he'd take care of everything, but everything came with a cost. My independence, my voice, my peace. By the time Zayden was a toddler, I barely recognized myself. I wasn't allowed to have a debit card. I wasn't allowed to drive without checking in. If I wore makeup, he'd ask who I was trying to impress. If I didn't, he'd say I looked lazy. It didn't matter what I did. It was never right. The final straw came one night when Zayden spilled juice on the carpet. He was just 5. Damien stood over him, yelling so loud the wall shook. I stepped in between them, shaking, and said, "You don't yell at him like that." Damon turned to me with that look in his eyes I'd seen too many times before. That night, I packed a backpack, took my son, and left. We stayed at my mother's for 2 weeks before I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I picked up a part-time job at the library during the day and cleaned offices at night. It was hard. Some days I barely slept, but I was free. And more than anything, Zayden was safe. My mom, Evelyn, became our anchor. She watched Zayden while I worked, helped with homework, made dinner. She'd been quiet when I was with Damien, but after we left, she told me the truth. I never wanted to interfere, she said. But I prayed every night that you'd leave him before it got worse. Damien didn't fight me for custody at first. For the first 2 years, he saw Zayden every other weekend and always acted like he was doing me a favor. But something changed 6 months ago. He showed up with a brand new suit and a lawyer. Said he wanted full custody. Claimed I was unstable. Said Zayden told him he wanted to live with him instead. It felt like a punch to the gut. I knew it wasn't true. Zayden loved his life with me. We had routines, laughter, bedtime stories, Saturday pancakes. He'd never once said he wanted to live with Damien, but I also knew how convincing Damien could be when he needed to be. He'd always been two people, the charming one the world saw, and the one I'd lived with behind closed doors. The weeks leading up to the hearing were filled with stress and questions. Zayden started having trouble sleeping. He clung to me more, asked strange questions about courts and judges. One night he crawled into bed with me and whispered, "What if someone lies and people believe them?" I turned to face him and stroked his hair. "Then we tell the truth," I said. "That's what we do, even when it's hard." He nodded, but he didn't say anything else. I didn't know it then, but he was already carrying the weight of what Damien had said to him. He was already preparing to tell the truth when it mattered most. The morning of the court date, he put on the gray jacket Evelyn had ironed the night before. He asked me if he could take the old phone I'd given him. I said yes without thinking much about it. He'd been using it to play music and little games. I never imagined that phone would be the key to everything. In that courtroom, with Damien's lies echoing through the air and the judge staring down at us like he was weighing the future on a scale, I sat there praying, not for the court to believe me, not even for justice. I prayed for my son to feel safe enough to speak his truth. And somehow, even at 8 years old, he did more than speak it. He proved it. The day Damon's lawyer served me with the custody papers, I dropped them in the kitchen sink and threw up. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grip the edge of the counter. Zayden was at school. I had 4 hours to pull myself together before picking him up. 4 hours to figure out how I was going to survive another war with the man I had barely escaped. I called my mom first. She came over with chamomile tea and her old file folder full of legal notes from when she went through her own divorce. She sat me down, took my hand, and said, "This is going to be hard, but it's not impossible. You have the truth on your side, and you have Zayden." Zayden, that's what terrified me the most. He was only 8. He didn't understand courtrooms or custody. He just wanted to play soccer after school and eat chocolate chip waffles on Saturday mornings. I didn't want to drag him through this, but I didn't have a choice. At first, Damon was calm, too calm. He showed up to pick Zayden up for his weekend visit, wearing new clothes and bringing toys I couldn't afford. He smiled wide, told me he wanted what was best for our son, and then whispered when Zayden wasn't looking, "You really think they're going to give him to someone working part-time and living in a shoebox?" I didn't answer. I closed the door and sat on the couch for 2 hours, staring at the front door like it might not open again. But it did. Zayden came back quiet. He went straight to his room. Didn't say much. Over the next few weekends, the silence grew. He stopped talking about what he and Damon did. He flinched when I asked how it went. One night, I heard him crying into his pillow. I sat at the edge of his bed and asked what was wrong. "Is it bad to not want to live with someone if they're your dad?" I froze. "No," I said, "it's not bad to want to feel safe." He rolled over and looked at me. "What if he gets mad if I say that?" I wanted to tell him not to worry, that the judge would listen, that everything would be okay. But I couldn't lie to him. I just held his hand and said, "No matter what happens, I will never stop fighting for you." 2 weeks before the hearing, Zayden started asking questions. What did a judge do? Who got to talk? Would he have to speak? I explained it as gently as I could, telling him the judge just wanted to understand what was best for him. He nodded like he understood, but he was scared. I could see it in his eyes. Then came the last weekend visit before court. Damon arrived in his SUV too early, like he was trying to catch us off guard. Zayden didn't want to go. He clung to my side and said he had a stomach ache. I almost kept him home, but Damon stood there on the porch, arms crossed, staring at me like he dared me to say no. Zayden walked out slowly. I watched from the window. They didn't know I could see them. Damon leaned down, his face inches from Zayden's, and spoke low and fast. Zayn didn't say a word. He just got into the car. When he came back Sunday night, he wasn't the same. He was quiet, withdrawn, too calm for an 8-year-old. He didn't eat dinner. He just sat on the floor in the living room messing with that old phone I gave him. I asked if everything was okay. He nodded, said he was tired, and went to bed early. That was the night before court. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what Damien had said to him, wondering if he had threatened him. I had no proof, just a feeling, a sick one I couldn't shake. The next morning, Zayden put on his jacket and asked for the phone again. I asked him why. He shrugged and said, I might want to listen to music. We drove to the courthouse in silence. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Zayden sat in the back, staring out the window. I glanced at him through the mirror. His face was blank, but his fingers were tight around that phone. When we walked into the courtroom, Damon was already seated with his lawyer. He turned and smiled at me like we were old friends. My stomach tightened. The judge entered. The bailiff called the room to order. Papers shuffled. Lawyers murmured. And then Damien stood up and said it. Zayden told me he wants to live with me. He said he doesn't feel safe with his mother. I stopped breathing. My hands curled into fists in my lap. I didn't dare look at Zayden. Then the judge turned to my son and asked him, is that true? Zayden stood up slowly, quietly. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out that old phone, and held it out. May I play the recording from last night? The judge looked at Zayden, caught off guard by the request. He tilted his head slightly, lowering his reading glasses to see the phone in Zayden's small hand. What is this recording, son? He asked. Zayden didn't stutter. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. It's from last night. My dad said something, and I didn't know if anyone would believe me, so I recorded it. The courtroom was still. Even Damien stopped whispering to his lawyer. He leaned forward, staring at the phone like it had betrayed him. The judge gave a short nod. Bring the phone here. Zayden walked across the room without looking at anyone. The sound of his sneakers brushing the floor echoed off the walls. He placed the phone gently on the judge's desk, then returned to his seat beside me. His shoulders were tense, and his eyes didn't leave the floor. I reached out, resting my hand lightly over his. He didn't look up, but he squeezed my fingers. Judge pressed play. There was static at first. Then Damon's voice, sharp and cold, filled the room. If you don't say you want to live with me, I swear I'll make sure your mother disappears. You understand me? Zayden's voice followed, shaky but clear. But I want to stay with Mommy. Damon snapped back. That's not your choice. You're just a kid. Say what I told you or things are going to get worse for her. The courtroom felt like it tilted sideways. There was a sound in the gallery, a gasp, maybe more than one. Damon's lawyer turned to him, eyes wide. Damon's face went rigid, his mouth slightly open like he couldn't believe what he just heard. He looked at me, then at Zayden, then down at the floor. The judge didn't move. He played the recording again, all the way through. No one spoke. When it ended, he took off his glasses and folded his hands. Is that your voice, Mr. Carter? Damon opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then finally, he muttered, It sounds like it, but did you threaten your son last night? The judge interrupted. His tone was firmer now. Damon glanced at his lawyer, who leaned in and whispered something, but the judge wasn't waiting. He turned to me. Ray, has your son ever expressed concern for your safety before this? I nodded. He's been afraid, especially after visits with his father. He stopped sleeping. He asked if people would believe the truth. I looked down at Zayden. His small fingers were still clutching mine. He sat up a little straighter now. The judge turned back to the courtroom. "I need a moment to review this," he said. "Court will recess for 15 minutes. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. People stood. Lawyers huddled together. I didn't move. My legs wouldn't work. I looked at my son, still stunned. "You recorded that?" I whispered. He nodded. I didn't know if they'd believe me. I just thought maybe they'd believe him. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. I pulled him into my arms and held him as tightly as I could without making a scene. Across the room, Damon stared straight ahead. His lawyer was already packing up files. Whatever confidence he walked in with had drained from his face. Evelyn walked over to us from the gallery. She hadn't said a word during the hearing. She crouched next to us and whispered, "You raised a brave boy, Marley." I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. I had walked into that courtroom, afraid I was about to lose everything. Instead, my 8-year-old son had stepped up and done what I couldn't have imagined. He told the truth when it mattered most. It wasn't just a child's voice they had heard. It was proof. It was courage. When court resumed, I didn't know what the judge would say yet. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Zayden had made his decision. He had taken action. And in doing so, he shifted the power in that room in a way that even Damien couldn't undo. We didn't win the case in that moment. But everything changed because of it. When the judge returned from recess, the room went quiet again. I sat with my hands clasped in my lap, still gripping the warmth from Zayden's small fingers. He leaned against me, tired but calm, like he had already done the hardest thing he would ever do. Judge Callahan adjusted his chair and looked across the room with a seriousness that hadn't been there earlier. He glanced at the bailiff, then at the two attorneys, and finally back at Damien. "I have reviewed the recording multiple times," he said. "There is no question in my mind that it is authentic. Mr. Carter, your voice, your words, and your intent were clear." Damien shifted in his seat. His eyes flicked to his lawyer, who was now sitting motionless beside him. "You threatened a child in order to influence the outcome of this case." The judge continued, "You attempted to manipulate your son to lie in this courtroom under the pretense that he wished to live with you. That is not only deeply disturbing, it is a direct violation of the ethical standards this court expects of a custodial parent." Damien opened his mouth like he was about to defend himself. But the judge held up a hand. "You will not speak again in this courtroom unless I ask you a direct question. Do you understand?" Damien nodded, jaw tight. The judge turned to Zayden. "Young man," he said, softening his voice, "what you did today took a great deal of courage. A courtroom can be a scary place for anyone, let alone a child your age. But you told the truth. You helped this court see what was really happening. And I want you to know that I heard you." Zayden didn't respond with words. He simply nodded once, eyes wide. I looked down at him and squeezed his hand again. He didn't let go. The judge turned back to the attorneys. "Given the evidence presented today, I am denying Mr. Carter's request for full custody. Effective immediately, all visitation rights are suspended pending a formal review. Mr. Carter will be required to undergo a psychological evaluation and parenting education program before any future supervised visits are considered." Damon exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair. His face was drained of color. The judge continued, addressing my attorney next. "Ms. Ray has demonstrated that she has provided a stable, supportive environment for her son, and in light of today's revelation, I find no reason to disrupt that. Full legal and physical custody remains with the mother. This ruling is final until further review, and any future contact between Mr. Carter and the minor will be at the discretion of this court." I felt my chest rise with a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't just relief. It was justice. For the first time in years, someone had seen through Damien's lies without me having to defend myself to exhaustion. And the person who made that possible was sitting right next to me, still holding my hand. The judge stood and banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." People started moving. Lawyers packed their bags. The bailiff stepped forward, but I couldn't move. I turned to Zayden and cupped his face in my hands. "You were so brave," I whispered. "I'm proud of you." You didn't have to do that, but you did. He looked up at me, eyes blinking with emotion he hadn't let out yet. I just wanted them to know the truth, he said. I didn't want you to get hurt. My heart broke and healed all in 1 second. I pulled him into my arms and held him there, surrounded by the sterile walls of the courthouse and the weight of everything we'd carried to that day. Damon walked past us on his way out, his expression empty. He didn't say a word. Zayden didn't look at him. He didn't need to. Evelyn met us in the hallway. She held her arms open wide and Zayden ran to her. She wrapped him in a hug so full of love I thought it might lift all three of us off the floor. We walked out of the courthouse together. The sunlight hit our faces as we stepped onto the sidewalk. Zayden looked up at me and I saw the boy I knew again. The one who laughed at cartoons, asked for extra syrup, and made up songs about our cat. The fear was gone. That was the day everything changed. Not because the court ruled in my favor, but because my son found his voice and used it when it mattered most. The ride home was quiet. Zayden sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his seatbelt drawn snug across his chest. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror every few minutes just to make sure he was still okay. He didn't say much, but he wasn't scared anymore. His shoulders were relaxed. His small hands were folded calmly in his lap. That was all I needed to see. When we got home, Evelyn had already warmed up a pot of chicken soup. She didn't say anything when we walked through the door. She just hugged us both, kissed Zayden's forehead, and handed me a warm bowl like it was her quiet way of saying, "You're safe now." Later that night, I tucked Zayden into bed. His room was full of his favorite books, stuffed animals, and the old blanket he refused to give up. The one with frayed corners and superhero patches. He slid under the covers and looked up at me. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. "No, baby," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're not in trouble. You told the truth, and that's never wrong." He hesitated, then whispered, "Will Daddy be mad?" I didn't rush to answer. I looked at his face, still so young, but shaped by something no child should have had to carry. I brushed his hair back and said, "He might be, but what he did was wrong. What you did was right, and being mad at the truth doesn't make it less true." He nodded slowly and rolled onto his side. I sat with him until he fell asleep. I watched his chest rise and fall, steady and peaceful. I wanted to remember that moment. After everything we had been through, my son could finally rest. In the weeks that followed, Damon tried to reach out. His lawyer called twice. Both times I referred them to the court order and hung up. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The fear had been replaced with something stronger. Resolve. Zayden started smiling more. He asked to ride his bike again. He asked for waffles on Saturday and snuck whipped cream from the fridge when he thought I wasn't looking. He talked about school, about his friend Jaden's weird haircut, about how he wanted to be an astronaut or maybe a video game designer. He laughed. A real belly-deep laugh that hadn't come out of him in months. One night while we were doing dishes, he said, "I think I want to be a lawyer." I laughed. "You'd be a great one," he grinned. "They listen to people who tell the truth, right?" I put the dish towel down and pulled him close. "Yes, and the best ones protect people who need to be heard." That night, I sat on the couch with a journal I hadn't touched in years. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "My son saved us." Not with anger, not with revenge, with truth. He reminded me that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a small voice, clear and steady, saying what needs to be said at exactly the right moment. Zayden didn't just help the court see the truth. He helped me see myself again, strong, capable, not broken, not helpless. I had survived the storm, but he had walked through it beside me. And in the end, he was the one who stood up. People talk a lot about protecting children, but sometimes children protect us. Sometimes they show us what it means to stand tall, to face down fear, to hold your ground when everything in you wants to run. I will never forget the look on his face in that courtroom. I will never forget the sound of his voice saying, "May I play the recording from last night?" And I will never forget how the world shifted because of it. This story wasn't just about a custody battle. It was about truth. It was about courage. And it was about an 8-year-old boy who chose to be brave when it mattered most. That day, the judge heard his voice. But more importantly, Zayden heard it, too, and he believed it. If this story moved you, If it reminded you of the quiet strength so many children carry or the battles parents fight behind closed doors, take a moment to share it. There are others who need to hear this. Leave a comment below and tell me what stood out to you the most. I read every single one. If you haven't already, hit the like button. It helps more people find this story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, powerful stories like this one. Every week, I share moments that matter. Stories that prove truth, courage, and love still win. Thank you for watching. And to anyone out there fighting a battle in silence, I hope this reminded you that your voice matters,